Take a slow breath and feel the quiet settle. The night drifts in like a slow-moving tide, settling quietly over the edges of the world. The air loosens its grip, unfolding into a hush that feels almost weightless. And as the darkness softens, a gentle path opens, inviting you to step into a story that moves at the pace of a resting heartbeat. In this moment, you don't have to hurry. You don't have to reach for anything at all. You can simply breathe, letting each inhale smooth the surface of your thoughts, letting each exhale carry away the remnants of the day. Imagine the faint glow of distant lamps, the kind that warm the night without disturbing it, spreading a slow amber shimmer across narrow streets and quiet windows. Let their light guide you, calmly and effortlessly, toward a time not your own, toward a place carried gently on the current of memory and history. As you settle deeper into stillness, let the world around you fade into a soft blur. Let every sound dissolve into a quiet hum, as if wrapped in layers of cotton and calm. The only thing that remains is the steady flow of words, rising and falling like the rhythm of gentle waves. You are here to drift, not to think. You are here to follow a story told in whispers, made of slow steps and soft echoes. Tonight, we drift back more than a century, toward a New York City that once breathed with a quieter, heavier rhythm. A city tucked beneath lamps fueled by dim flame, where morning fog curled low over rooftops and nightfall arrived with a muted glow. The pace was different then, unhurried, unpolished, and wrapped in a patchwork of small lives woven together by routine. These streets were narrow, their stones worn down by countless footsteps, moving with the weight of long days and silent hopes. The city was younger, but it felt older, shaped by the hands of people who carried their pasts in the folds of their clothes. Breathe softly as you picture this world. A world where the sky hung heavy with smoke from chimneys and river fog, drifting slowly like a veil gently tugged by the wind. Listen to the quiet shuffle of shoes along the pavement, the faint tapping of horse hooves fading into the dusk. Hear the murmur of distant conversations carried on the breeze, words spoken in many languages blending into one low, peaceful hum. Life moved in simple strokes, steady, unadorned, a quiet persistence that stretched from dawn to night. As you sink deeper into this calm, imagine following those slow, gentle footsteps into one small corner of the city, Lower East Side, a neighborhood wrapped in a dense weave of stories and small rooms. Here, people from faraway lands made new beginnings in spaces no larger than the sound of a sigh. In narrow hallways and quiet stairwells, their days rose and fell with a steady rhythm, each one blending softly into the next. There was a stillness inside these rooms, even when many hands worked together in the dim light. Stillness made not of silence, but of familiarity, of repetition, of routine, of days shaped by movement that was slow, careful, and constant. Let your breath mirror their rhythm, unhurried, steady, and gentle. Feel the soft pulse of a world held together by daily labor, by the warmth of shared rooms, by the faint scent of tobacco leaves drying quietly on wooden tables. Nothing rushes here. Nothing presses forward. Everything simply continues, softly, patiently, inevitably, like the movement of a lullaby repeating its own melody. Here, in this gentle beginning, you are drifting through a doorway of time. The edges blur, the night deepens, and the story opens its arms, inviting you to rest within it, to float along its slow current, wrapped in quietness and calm. Now, as the night settles fully around you, let the scene expand in soft motion. Imagine the Lower East Side as it once was, rows of aging buildings pressed close together, their windows glowing faintly with the low light of oil lamps. Inside these narrow spaces lived communities that carried with them the memory of distant homelands. Among them was the Bohemian community, made up of families who had traveled far across the ocean in search of steadier ground. They arrived with simple expectations: a place to work, a place to live, a place to continue their lives quietly. But what they found was a landscape shaped by long hours, modest earnings, and rooms that blended work and home into a single, unbroken space. In these tenements, life unfolded in measured steps. The days were defined by routine, by hands rolling tobacco leaves on worn wooden tables, by soft murmurs shared between family members as they worked from morning light until evening shadows. The rooms were small, but they held entire worlds built from repetition, from perseverance, from the steady rhythm of shared labor. The community moved together in quiet understanding, embracing a life that required patience and endurance. And as their story begins to unfold, it reveals a portrait of resilience carried gently through time, shaped not by sudden changes, but by the soft persistence of everyday living. Chapter 1. The Journey to New York. The night settles gently across the old world, like a soft blanket drifting down from the quiet sky. It moves slowly, brushing over rooftops, over fields left behind after long seasons, over roads worn smooth by footsteps searching for something more. In this stillness, a quiet thought begins to form in the hearts of many families. It rises without urgency, without pressure, like a breeze passing through an open window. It carries with it the idea of leaving, of moving toward a place where life might open more softly, more steadily, in ways they can only imagine in the hushed corners of the evening. And so, little by little, a journey begins. In the final years of the 19th century, countless people across Europe faced mornings that arrived with the same weight, day after day. Harvests had grown thin, work had become uncertain, and the familiar rhythms of life no longer offered enough to sustain them. Yet even amidst these difficulties, hope moved quietly beneath the surface, like a stream hidden under winter ice. It whispered of new lands and new beginnings, of a distant shore across a vast ocean where the air might carry different possibilities. Families listened to that whisper. Not all at once, not with haste, but with a gentle, steady acceptance that change was drifting toward them, asking to be followed. When the decision grew firm, it did so with calm determination. People gathered their belongings, some wrapped in cloth, some tucked into worn cases, and prepared themselves for the long passage west. They carried stories from their homelands, the voices of their ancestors, and the soft memories of familiar hills and villages. They did not rush. They stepped forward as though guided by an invisible path, one that unfolded at their feet with every breath. The journey was not only a physical crossing, but also a quiet shift inside, where hope and uncertainty rested side by side, touching gently like the meeting of two calm currents. Ships waited in harbors, their silhouettes rising slowly against the pale sky. For many, it was the first time standing before such a massive vessel, but even then, the moment felt strangely peaceful, The wooden decks, the tall masts, the soft creaks of ropes swaying in the breeze, all of it blended into a sound like an invitation. When the ships finally set sail, they did not leap forward. They glided. They moved with the rhythm of the sea, carried by waves that lifted and lowered them with the serenity of deep breathing. Days passed with the same gentle motion. Nights stretched long and quiet, filled with the low hum of the ocean touching the hull. People rested, dreamed, and let the passage reshape them. The Atlantic, in its vastness, became a companion. Its slow, constant murmuring soothed weary travelers, giving them time to settle into the thought of the life waiting ahead. They watched the horizon shift from blue to gold to a deep, velvety black. They spoke softly among themselves, sharing thoughts that rose and fell like the tide. Some imagined the streets of America, others simply allowed themselves to drift in the calm of the voyage. The days blended into one another, each carrying the quiet promise of arrival. Then one morning, as the light grew stronger, a faint outline appeared in the distance. It was not yet clear, but it pulled every gaze forward. The outline sharpened, lifting slowly through the mist, revealing tall shapes rising from the water's edge. New York. Even from afar, the city felt like a presence breathing steadily, waiting for every traveler who approached. The ship glided toward it, unhurried, like a leaf carried by a gentle current. No one rushed to the railings. Instead, they moved with slow wonder, letting the moment wash over them softly. As the harbor spread out before them, people could see the movement of the city, tiny figures walking along the piers, carriages rolling down narrow roads, the flicker of lamps glowing even in daylight. The air carried a mix of scents, salt, smoke, and something new, something unfamiliar, yet strangely welcoming. When the ship finally docked, the passengers stepped onto the wooden planks one by one. Each footstep landed with the soft weight of both ending and beginning. From the harbor, families made their way toward the Lower East Side, where many newcomers found their first home in America. The streets here were lively, filled with voices in countless languages, weaving together into one gentle, continuous hum. Buildings stood close to one another, forming long rows of brick and stone. Some looked worn, some freshly repaired, but all carried the warmth of human presence. Laundry fluttered from windows, carts rolled slowly along uneven roads, and the air moved through the narrow spaces with a soft, busy whisper. It was unfamiliar, yet it held a steady comfort, like the first notes of a new song. The Lower East Side became the beginning point for many. Families settled into small apartments, rooms that were modest but offered shelter and a place to rest. They opened their windows to the sounds of the neighborhood, the laughter of children, the call of distant vendors, the low murmur of evening conversations drifting through thin walls. Fear did not rush forward. It unfolded gradually, giving each family time to adjust, to breathe, to observe. The city carried its own rhythm, and the newcomers learned to move with it, step by soft step. In these first days, there was no urgency. People explored the streets slowly, letting their eyes settle on every detail. The way light touched the brick walls, the curve of staircases leading to narrow doorways, the quiet corners where neighbors paused to speak. They discovered small shops selling bread, still warm from the oven, markets filled with vegetables arranged in gentle colors, and gathering places where music occasionally drifted into the air like a soothing breeze. Nothing was rushed. Everything invited them to take their time, to settle their hearts into this new landscape. And so their journey, which began beneath the quiet skies of Europe, found its first resting place here, among the soft murmurs of the Lower East Side, where each family began weaving their next chapter with patience and quiet hope. The unfamiliar slowly became familiar. The distant slowly became near. And the long voyage across the ocean resolved into the simple, steady rhythm of daily life in a world full of gentle possibility. Chapter 2. The Bohemian Community in the Lower East Side. In the gentle hush of early evening, when the city begins to dim its lights and soften its edges, there is a quiet corner of New York that once held a small, yet unmistakable presence. It was the home of the Bohemian community, a group of people who traveled far across continents and oceans, carrying with them the soft memories of their homeland, now known as the Czech Republic. Like a faint melody lingering in the air, their arrival brought a subtle, new rhythm to the Lower East Side, a rhythm woven not with boldness or flourish, but with patience, steadiness, and the calm endurance of daily life. The Bohemians who settled here were not many, but their footsteps left gentle marks across the narrow streets. They came with few possessions, most of them carrying only what could be held in the crook of an arm or wrapped carefully in simple cloth. Yet even with so little, there was a quiet grace in the way they carried themselves, an unspoken understanding that life does not always need abundance to feel whole. Their journey had shaped them, smoothing away the roughness of expectation and leaving behind a soft resilience, like a stone polished by the slow movement of water. When they arrived in the Lower East Side, they found themselves drawn to the tenements, those old buildings standing shoulder to shoulder, their bricks worn by time, their staircases creaking with each step. These tenements were small, simple, and sometimes dark, yet they offered a shelter that felt steady, a place where the Bohemians could lay down the weight of their travels and begin to settle. Within these narrow rooms, life unfolded with a gentle consistency. The walls might have been thin, the windows small, but the rooms held warmth in the form of shared breaths, shared meals, and shared quiet hours of work. The spaces they lived in were modest. Often, a single room would serve as kitchen, bedroom, workspace, and resting place all at once. The light that entered through the narrow windows would spread softly across the wooden floor, casting calm shadows that moved slowly throughout the day. When dusk arrived, the glow of a small lamp would replace the sun, filling the room with a gentle golden hue. Nothing was grand. Nothing was extravagant. But everything existed in a peaceful, unhurried way. In these rooms, the Bohemian community built their days from routines that flowed as gently as a lullaby. They were people accustomed to labor, not harsh, frantic labor, but the slow, steady motion of consistent effort. Their hands learned the patterns of their work until each movement felt like part of a familiar dance. They rose in the morning, not to chase wealth or ambition, but to maintain a life crafted with care. Their rhythm was quiet but certain, a rhythm that carried them through each sunrise and sunset with calm endurance. Though they had arrived in America, their lives were not suddenly transformed. The Bohemians were a community with no wealthy members, no patrons, no individuals who could lift the burden of poverty from the shoulders of the many. They walked the same narrow hallways, climbed the same worn staircases, and returned each evening to rooms that looked much like the ones they had left behind earlier in the day. But within this sameness there was a kind of gentle stability, a consistency that soothed rather than constrained. The tenements became more than places to sleep. They became quiet worlds where the Bohemians lived, worked, shared stories, and gently shaped their days into patterns that brought comfort and familiarity. The sound of everyday life blended into a soft symphony. The murmur of conversations through the thin walls, the faint tapping of tools on wooden tables, the calm shuffle of footsteps across the hall. These sounds were not intrusive. They formed a backdrop, steady and predictable, wrapping the community in a sense of togetherness. Here, in this small corner of the city, the Bohemians recreated fragments of the home they had left behind, not through grand traditions or elaborate customs, but through the quiet gestures that carried the essence of their culture. A shared meal prepared in a familiar way, a lullaby sung softly in the evening, a simple story told to a child before sleep. These gentle acts held the heart of their heritage. They were carried from one generation to the next with tenderness, like a candle flame sheltered by careful hands. Their days were unhurried, shaped by routines that never demanded speed. Work began at a calm pace, continued through the afternoon with steady focus, and ended when the light outside softened into dusk. There was no urgency, only constancy. Their labor was not the chase of success, but the quiet maintenance of life. Through this, they built an existence marked by perseverance rather than ambition, and by patience rather than pursuit. Though they did not possess wealth, the Bohemians held something equally steady: the ability to endure. In a city bustling with noise, haste, and constant change, their presence felt like a soft, grounded note in a song that often rushed too quickly. They moved through their days with a gentle steadiness, accepting the limitations of their surroundings while shaping whatever they could with care. Even in the dimmer rooms where sunlight reached only in thin slivers, there was a sense of calm. The Bohemians found beauty in small, quiet things: the glow of a lamp warming the walls, the scent of simple food cooking on a low stove, the murmur of voices blending into the evening air. Each moment carried the softness of a life lived without excess, but with deep resilience. In this way, the Bohemian community lived in the Lower East Side, not in grand houses or bustling workplaces, but in modest tenements that held their hopes gently. Their presence was never loud, never demanding. It was subtle, steady, and woven into the fabric of the neighborhood like a thread of warm, muted color. And as the days turned to months and the months to years, they built a life that breathed quietly, softly, with the gentle persistence of a lullaby that never quite ends. Chapter 3: The Cigar-Making Craft and its Steady Rhythm. In the soft cradle of morning light, when the first pale glow slips quietly through narrow windows and brushes gently against the wooden floors, the rhythm of the Bohemian households begins. It does not start with haste or clamor. It begins in a hush, with the calm unfolding of another day dedicated to a craft that shaped their lives in the Lower East Side, the slow, steady art of cigar making. It was the work they carried from their homeland, the work that became both their means of survival and the pulse of their daily existence. And in this world of gentle repetition, they discovered a rhythm that soothed even the most restless hearts. The cigar-making craft was not performed in large factories buzzing with noise or machines. It unfolded in quiet rooms worn smooth by time, within the same walls where families slept, cooked, whispered, and shared their smallest joys. The workshop and the home were the same space, intertwined so completely that the boundary between them dissolved into a single breath. In the early hours, when the streets below were still quiet, the families would gather around long wooden tables, their surfaces softened by years of use, each bearing the faint scent of tobacco leaves that had passed through countless hands. The work began when the owner of the tenement, who was often also the employer, distributed bundles of tobacco to each household. These bundles were placed gently on the table, wrapped not just in cloth, but in the soft weight of expectation. They were to be shaped into cigars by the end of the week, each leaf transformed through patient fingers. The air inside the room held a mild, earthy scent, drifting slowly into the corners and settling like a familiar song. It was a fragrance that became part of their daily lives, something they barely noticed after a while, like the distant hum of a lullaby floating on the breeze. The day stretched ahead in a long, unhurried path. Movements were repeated again and again, quiet, precise, familiar. One person would strip the veins from the tobacco leaves, sliding their fingers down the stem with a soft, practiced motion. Another would form the filler, shaping the inside of the cigar with care. Someone else, often the wife, sometimes the husband, would roll the wrapper around it, smoothing it into place with gentle pressure. The motions blended together like notes in a soft melody, creating a flow that carried them through the day. There was something calming in this repetition, something deeply soothing in movements that asked for focus without strain. Their hands moved without urgency, guided by memory rather than thought. The rhythm became almost meditative, like listening to the soft roll of waves on a quiet shore. Families worked side by side, sharing the silence in a way that felt warm and connected. Every so often, a quiet phrase might drift through the room, a soft exchange between parents and children, but mostly the work unfolded without need for many words. In these rooms, time passed gently. Morning deepened into afternoon, and the light shifted slowly across the wooden table. The soft rustle of tobacco leaves became the soundtrack of the day, rising and falling with the steady rhythm of their work. Outside, the city moved with its own energy, children shouting in the streets, vendors calling out to passers-by, but inside there was a pocket of calm that remained undisturbed. It was as if the walls themselves held the stillness, keeping the pace slow, keeping the world quiet. As the hours stretched toward evening, the families continued their work with the same steady patience. There was no strict clock, no sudden need to rush. The schedule was shaped by the flow of the day, by how much light remained, by how the hands felt after long hours of crafting. Sometimes they paused for a simple meal, bread, soup, warm tea, shared in the same room where the work lay waiting. The table might be cleared briefly, or they might eat at the side, leaving the piles of tobacco leaves where they were. Everything blended seamlessly, as though life itself was a slow thread weaving through the fabric of the day. The work did not end when the sun went down. Often, the warm yellow glow of a small lamp replaced the fading daylight, casting a soft circle of light across the room. Shadows stretched long on the walls, dancing gently with each shift of movement. The night carried a calmness that made the work feel even slower, even more serene. The world outside grew quiet, and within the walls of the tenement, the gentle crackle of leaves and the faint sound of careful hands continued into the late hours. This long day of labor, beginning before dawn and ending well after dusk, became the heartbeat of the Bohemian community. It was a rhythm they held on to, steady and grounding, Though the work was extensive and the hours were many, there was a familiarity in the routine that carried them forward. The room, the table, the family gathered together. These elements formed a small universe where everything moved with a soft predictability. There was also a quiet dignity in their craft. Each cigar, shaped through hours of careful attention, carried a piece of their patience. They knew they were not creating luxury, they were creating livelihood. Yet the gentle dedication they poured into every movement gave the work a peaceful quality, a sense of purpose that rested softly on their shoulders. They continued day after day, not because the work was easy, but because the rhythm itself became a companion, a gentle presence that steadied them. As night deepened, the families finally set aside their tools. The leftover leaves were wrapped carefully, stored for the next day. The table was cleared, the lamp dimmed, the room grew quiet, holding the faint scent of tobacco and the lingering warmth of shared labor. They lay down to rest, knowing that when morning returned, the rhythm would begin again, soft, familiar, and steady as a lullaby woven through their lives. Chapter 4. Low Wages and High Rent. In the quiet cradle of each passing day, the Bohemian families of the Lower East Side moved gently through a life shaped by two steady, unchanging currents. The small wages they earned and the high rents they paid. These two forces flowed side by side, creating a rhythm as familiar as the rise and fall of breath. And though this rhythm was firm and unyielding, the families carried it with a calm endurance, embracing the routine as one embraces the soft repetition of waves against the shore. Their income, modest and delicate, arrived in the form of small payments for long hours of careful work. A husband and wife might sit at their wooden table from dawn until the soft glow of night, crafting 3,000 cigars in a week. Their hands moved steadily, shaping leaf after leaf with quiet precision. Yet when the week came to an end and their work was gathered by the employer, the wages they received felt light, almost fragile, like a handful of petals placed gently into their palms. It was enough to keep life moving, but never quite enough to let life expand. The rent, however, remained a constant presence, solid, unwavering, and always waiting. The monthly amount did not bend or soften. It stood there at the doorway of each new month, asking to be met. In small rooms lit by thin slices of sunlight, families would place their coins on the table, counting them slowly, letting the sounds fall into the quiet air like tiny drops of rain. There was no rush, only a gentle patience as they arranged their earnings, knowing exactly how much would remain once the rent had been paid. Balance between income and expense shaped their days with a soft but unmistakable weight. It was not a dramatic burden, not one that brought sudden storms or sharp edges. Instead, it was a steady presence, always there, like the muted hum of a distant train. They lived within this pattern year after year, moving through each week with the same intention: work with care, earn what can be earned, and keep the household warm and stable. Because their work and their home were intertwined, the two threads could not be separated. The tenements were not simply places to sleep, they were the rooms where cigars were rolled, where tobacco leaves were stripped, where the daily labor unfolded in slow, patient motions. Leaving the home meant leaving the workspace. And leaving the workspace meant surrendering the income that held everything together. The rooms themselves became the heart of the family's survival, a delicate center that both comforted and confined them, in gentle ways. It was this connection that made it difficult to choose another path. Even when the wages felt too small, even when the rent felt too heavy, there was no easy way to step outside the pattern. To move meant to lose. To protest meant to risk both job and shelter. So the families stayed, anchored by necessity, yet floating on a quiet sea of endurance. They accepted the rhythm, not with despair, but with the calm understanding that sometimes life asks us to move slowly through its tightest spaces. In the soft glow of evening, after a long day's work, the rooms took on a different atmosphere. The tools were set aside, the tobacco leaves folded neatly into bundles, and the wooden table became the place where dinner was shared. In those hours, the pressures of wage and rent softened into the background. Children might laugh quietly, or an older family member might hum an old tune from the homeland. The warmth of the room dimmed the edges of worry, leaving behind only the gentle closeness of being together. Yet even in these moments of rest, the pattern hovered nearby, not intrusive, but present, like a gentle reminder resting at the edge of thought. Tomorrow would come, and with it, the familiar routine of work and calculation. Still, the families did not rush into tomorrow. They stayed in the present moment, letting the peaceful quiet settle over them like a soft blanket. In this atmosphere, the challenges of the day took on a muted glow, becoming part of the steady rhythm rather than something to resist. Over the years, the cycle remained unchanged. The wages stayed small, the rent stayed high, and the families continued to balance the two with careful intention. It was a long, slow dance, neither joyful nor sorrowful, simply a quiet movement forward. The tenements witnessed it all, the early mornings filled with soft rustling, the late nights when only a single lamp flickered against the walls, the moments of hope, the moments of fatigue, and the endless flow of days that carried them gently through time. Some families found ways to save a few coins, tucking them away in small cloth pouches hidden deep within drawers. Others spent everything they earned each week, meeting the rent, but leaving little beyond that. But almost all of them lived within the same narrow margin, where the space between what they gained and what they owed remained small and delicate, like the thin distance between two folds of paper. Still, they endured. Not with resistance or bitterness, but with a calm, almost meditative acceptance. Their lives were woven from threads of repetition and patience. And in that repetition, they found a kind of quiet strength. They learned to move gently through each challenge, to breathe slowly when the budget tightened, and to rest in the knowledge that their work, though modest, kept their home warm and their family safe. As the years passed, this cycle etched itself into the rhythm of their days, forming a pattern as soft and steady as a lullaby. The Bohemian families continued to live within it, crafting their lives with care, carrying their hopes in small but enduring ways, and walking the delicate balance between low wages and high rent with the serene resilience of those who understand the quiet art of persistence. Chapter 5. The risk of losing work and losing home. In the gentle hush of each unfolding day, the Bohemian families of the Lower East Side lived with a quiet awareness that their stability rested on delicate ground. It was not a fear that rushed or pressed against them sharply. Instead, it drifted in the background like a faint, unchanging echo, soft, steady, always present. Their work, their home, their place in the narrow rhythm of the tenements were all woven together into a single thread. And because of this, any disturbance in their work carried with it the possibility of unsettling everything they held steady. Within this fragile structure of labor, the workers had only a small space in which to move. Their choices were limited, shaped by the close connection between the rooms they lived in and the work that sustained them. The employer, who often owned the tenement itself, held both keys, the key to their income and the key to their shelter. This connection created a world where each action needed to be considered gently, where each decision had to fall softly, like petals drifting onto still water. Any ripple could threaten the calm surface on which their lives balanced. Because of this, workers rarely raised their voices, they rarely questioned the wages that arrived light in their pockets, or the long hours required to earn them. They understood with a quiet clarity that to resist the routine could invite consequences far heavier than the daily strain. If a worker pushed back against the low pay, the employer could take away not only the job, but also the very room the family lived in. Losing one meant losing the other. It was this delicate tether that kept the families anchored to their work with steady, measured steps. Their world became a place where maintaining stability mattered more than anything else. The rhythm they created, slow, repeated, careful, was not simply a way of working. It was a way of preserving the home, the warmth of the lamp at night, the simple meals shared at the wooden table, the faint comfort of knowing that tomorrow would look the same as today. In this quiet cycle, there was a sense of safety, even if that safety came with its own restraints. They moved gently, not because they wished to avoid change entirely, but because sudden change could sweep away the fragile structure they lived within. This awareness shaped everything. Families walked through the hallways with soft footsteps as though aware that sound itself could be a disturbance. Discussions about wages or difficulties were whispered only in the privacy of late evening, when the children slept and the night settled like a protective layer over their worries. Even their hopes were held softly in small, manageable shapes so that disappointment would not arrive abruptly. Work became an anchor not simply because it was a source of income, but because it was a shield, a way to remain within the rooms that gave them shelter. Each morning, as workers sat at their tables, their hands repeating familiar motions, they carried with them the gentle determination to hold on to that stability. They shaped each cigar not only out of duty, but out of the quiet understanding that every piece completed helped keep the home secure. There was a deep, calm purpose in this repetition, a soothing rhythm that moved through every hour. Families adjusted their lives to support this steadiness. They avoided confrontations, avoided sudden decisions, avoided anything that might shake the delicate balance. Their routines became their protection. At dawn, they rose softly. At midday, they continued their work with calm persistence. At night, they settled into rest, knowing that their care throughout the day had kept the rhythm intact. Each family became like a small island, drifting gently in the slow current of tenement life, sheltered by their consistency. In this way of living, even small actions took on a kind of quiet significance. A missed day of work, a disagreement with the employer, or even a delay in finishing the weekly quota could open the door to uncertainty. So the families moved with intention, choosing calm paths, seeking predictability in all things. The tenements, though old and crowded, became places where routine itself offered comfort. The walls were familiar, the floors creaked in expected ways, Even the narrow windows held a sense of constancy, letting in light that fell the same way each morning. Out of this rhythm, a kind of peace emerged, a gentle acceptance of the boundaries they lived within. It was not a peace born of abundance, but one that grew from understanding. The Bohemian families knew their world was delicate, like a paper lantern glowing softly in the night. They protected that lantern with quiet movements, shielding it carefully from winds of change that might arrive without warning. Children grew up learning this quiet balance. They learned to speak softly, to move gently, to respect the routines that held the family steady. They watched their parents work with calm dedication and absorbed the unspoken message that stability came from patience. The days taught them that life, even when narrow, could hold a certain warmth if one embraced its rhythms rather than resisted them. Outside the tenements, the world rushed forward. The city moved with noise and energy, full of sudden changes and busy streets. But within the walls of the Bohemian households, life flowed like a slow river, smooth and constant. They continued their craft with steady hands. They closed their doors with quiet care. They lived in a state of gentle preservation, holding on to the things that mattered most. And through it all, the possibility of losing work, and with it, losing home, remained a soft, distant presence. Not a threat, but a reminder. It nudged them toward caution, toward steadiness, toward routines that wrapped around their lives like a protective cocoon. And so they moved gently through each day, holding on to their place in the world with calm persistence, shaping their lives within a rhythm that whispered of both fragility and quiet resilience. Chapter 6. Long hours of work and the quiet participation of the whole family. In the soft cradle of the tenement rooms, where walls held the faint warmth of countless days lived in quiet repetition, the work of the Bohemian families unfolded like a long, gentle breath. These spaces, small and humble, became the center of their world, embracing them in a calm stillness that stretched from early morning light to the late hush of night. Here, in these close-knit rooms, the family gathered not only to share life but to share labor, weaving their hours together with hands that moved slowly, patiently, in rhythms that felt almost like the steady beating of a resting heart. The day often began before the sun had fully risen. A thin band of pale light would slip quietly through the narrow windows, touching the edges of the wooden table where bundles of tobacco leaves rested like soft stacks of muted color. The family would wake with calm movements, never in haste. Their footsteps were light, their voices barely above a whisper, as if they did not wish to disturb the deep stillness that lingered in the morning air. One by one, they gathered around the long table, settling into their familiar places. Here, adults and sometimes children worked together. The presence of every family member formed a gentle circle of shared purpose. The adults carried the heavier part of the work, their hands moving with practiced grace through motions repeated countless times. Children, small and curious, often learned by watching, their eyes following the steady hands of their parents. When they were old enough, they joined in with light tasks, sorting leaves, smoothing edges, or placing finished cigars in neat rows. Their movements were slow and careful, guided by the soft murmurs of encouragement from those beside them. As the morning deepened, the soft sound of tobacco leaves being handled filled the room. It was a tender sound, light, crisp, delicate, like the rustling of dry petals in a quiet garden. The The repetitive motions formed a gentle music of their own, rising and falling with the easy rhythm of the family's breathing. After a while, the sound felt less like work and more like a peaceful melody woven into the air, settling calmly around them. Hours passed quietly. The world outside might have been bustling with hurried footsteps and loud exchanges, but inside the tenement, everything moved at a slower pace. The steady hum of life in the room wrapped itself around each family member like a soft blanket. There was no rushing, no sudden movements, no sharp interruptions. The long day opened before them like a smooth path, and they walked it together with patience and unspoken unity. At midday, the light shifted gently, stretching longer across the table. Sometimes they paused for a simple meal, bread, broth, a warm drink. The table was cleared just enough to make space for bowls and spoons. They sat close together, speaking softly or simply sharing the quiet. When the pause ended, the work resumed with the same slow steadiness, as if the rhythm had been waiting patiently for their return. Hours continued to unfold. The room warmed with the subtle heat of bodies working side by side. The scent of tobacco leaves grew stronger, though it drifted through the air gently, softened by familiarity. The children sometimes hummed a tune under their breath, a simple melody learned from home. Their humming mingled with the gentle rustling of leaves, creating a soundscape that wrapped around the family in a soothing embrace. The long stretch of afternoon often felt timeless. The steady flow of work created a sense of calm suspension, as though the outside world had paused and only the quiet rhythm of the family remained. The adults rolled, shaped, pressed, and smoothed. The children assisted with tasks just within their reach. No one hurried, no one counted the minutes. The day moved forward on its own, guided by the softness of routine. As evening approached, the light from the windows dimmed to a warm amber. The families lit their lamps, small flames flickering gently, casting long shadows against the walls. These shadows danced softly with the movements around the table, accompanying the family like patient companions. The work continued in this golden glow, slower now, softened by the gathering quiet of night. There was something soothing in the long hours, even though the work itself was demanding. Perhaps it was the closeness of the family or the gentle repetition that lulled the mind into a peaceful state. Perhaps it was knowing that each motion, each carefully shaped cigar, contributed to the stability of their home. Whatever it was, the long day did not feel harsh. It felt like a steady river they floated upon together. Late at night, when the sky outside had grown dark and the street noises had settled into a distant murmur, the family finally drew the day to a close. The tobacco leaves were wrapped and stored, the table was cleared, the tools were placed neatly aside, the lamp flame flickered as if sighing into the silence. The room, warm and softly illuminated, felt like a cocoon ready to rest. In those final moments, the family often sat quietly, allowing the day to settle around them. Their hands, tired but calm, rested gently on their laps. Their breaths fell into slow, peaceful patterns. The children leaned against their parents, their eyes heavy with sleep. The adults exchanged soft greetings or small smiles, acknowledging their shared effort. Then slowly the lamp was dimmed, the shadows lengthened, then dissolved. The room slipped into darkness, holding the faint scent of tobacco and the warmth of the day's labor. The family lay down to rest, knowing that tomorrow the gentle rhythm would begin again. Not as a burden, but as a familiar companion, steady, slow, and soothing, like the heartbeat of the home. Chapter 7. Language Barriers and Gentle Isolation. In the quiet corners of the Lower East Side, where narrow hallways carried the soft echoes of everyday life, the Bohemian families moved through their days with a gentle rhythm shaped not only by their work, but by the language that lived within their walls. Their voices, warm and familiar, flowed in the tones and sounds of their homeland, a language they had carried across the ocean like a cherished keepsake. And as the years drifted by, this language remained the one they used most, the one that wrapped around their lives like a soft, comforting blanket. Many of them spent more than a decade living in America, yet English never rooted itself deeply in their tongues. It was not resistance nor neglect. It was simply the natural result of a life lived almost entirely inside small rooms filled with family, work, and quiet routine. Their world was shaped inward, not outward. Their days unfolded in the narrow spaces where the same familiar voices spoke the same familiar words, weaving a sense of belonging that made the outside world feel distant, as though separated by a thin veil of fog. Each morning, they woke to the sound of their mother tongue drifting gently across the room. Soft greetings, small conversations about breakfast, questions about the day's work. These words were warm, worn smooth by years of use, fitting easily into the air like notes from an old lullaby. There was no urgency to learn a new language when the old one carried them comfortably through the hours from sunrise to dusk. And because their work was performed inside the home, there were few moments that required stepping beyond that circle of familiarity. The cigar-making craft drew them steadily into a cycle of long days, keeping them close to the tables where tobacco leaves were stacked and shaped. The routine of rolling, pressing, and sorting left little time for wandering through the city or interacting with those outside their community. The walls of the tenement, thin yet containing, became both the boundary and the shelter of their world. Within those walls, the old language thrived, growing roots in every corner, every shared meal, every whispered story before the children fell asleep. Outside, English drifted through the streets, voices of vendors chatter from shop windows, the rising and falling sound of conversations carried through the busy air. But inside the Bohemian homes, the foreign rhythm of that language felt far away, like a song heard faintly from another room. The children, especially those old enough to observe but young enough to absorb, sometimes leaned toward the unfamiliar sounds. They caught glimpses of English in the voices of neighbors or in the laughter of other children playing on the street. But when they returned to their homes, the familiar language flowed around them gently, pulling them back into the quiet circle of shared origin. This environment created a gentle kind of isolation, not harsh, not lonely, but simply enclosed. It was like living inside a soft cocoon woven from routine and tradition. The families did not feel trapped. Instead, they felt held. Their world was small, but it was safe. They moved through the days with a sense of belonging that did not require navigating unfamiliar words or foreign expressions. Their focus remained on the things closest to them: family, work, shared meals, and the gentle warmth of living among those who understood them without the need for translation. In these households, conversations flowed easily. Instructions for work were given in familiar tones, stories from the homeland were told with rich detail, never losing their depth or emotion. Even the smallest jokes carried a softness born from shared history. Children grew up hearing these sounds from the moment they could first comprehend shapes and voices. For them, the language was a nest, something that protected them from the confusion of the outside world. When they stepped beyond their building, the English words that floated around them felt slippery and foreign. But once they crossed the threshold back into their home, everything made sense again. This gentle isolation shaped not only their speech, but their sense of identity. The Bohemians became a small island within the bustling sea of New York City. Around them, countless cultures mingled: Italian, Jewish, Irish, German, but inside their homes, the atmosphere remained uniquely their own. The world outside moved quickly, filled with the noise of ambition and the rush of opportunity. But the world inside moved slowly, guided by routines passed down from one generation to the next. Sometimes a family member might try to learn English, perhaps a child who ventured into the streets more often, or someone who needed to communicate with a shop owner or a landlord. They approached the new language gently, trying out simple phrases, repeating new sounds. Yet even when they made progress, returning home often brought them back into the warm embrace of the old language, which welcomed them with soft familiarity. Learning English felt less like a necessity and more like an optional path that few had time or space to explore. The isolation was not one of loneliness. It was a quiet togetherness, a closeness that came from living side by side in small rooms where every sound, every movement, every breath was shared. This closeness formed a bond stronger than any words from outside could break. Their community became like a single long thread, weaving through each household, connecting one family to another with the gentle certainty of shared origin. Evenings settled softly. After long days of slow, steady work, the families gathered for meals, their conversations flowing in familiar tones. The lamplight flickered warm and low, casting soft shadows that danced on the walls. The children listened to stories told in the language of their ancestors, their eyelids growing heavy as the words wrapped around them like a lullaby. Outside, English continued to hum through the streets. Inside, the Boheme tongue filled every corner with calm, unbroken continuity. And so, year after year, the Bohemian families lived within this gentle enclosure. The language barrier remained, not as an obstacle, but as a quiet companion shaping their days. The isolation they felt was not sharp or painful, but soft and protective, allowing them to focus on what mattered most: family, work, and the peaceful rhythm of their daily lives. Chapter 8: Simple Living Conditions and Their Quiet Influence on Health. In the gentle stillness of the Lower East Side, where days drifted softly into one another, the tenement homes of the Bohemian families rested like quiet shells along narrow streets. These homes, modest and worn, held within them the murmurs of countless hours lived in steady routine. They were small spaces, built long before comfort was a consideration, yet they became the center of each family's world, a fragile container for work, rest, and the soft flow of everyday life. Within these slender walls, the simple conditions shaped not only their days, but also the delicate rhythms of their bodies. The rooms themselves were small, sometimes so narrow that only a few steps carried one from wall to wall. Light entered sparingly, slipping through narrow windows that filtered the sun into gentle fragments. Morning light would stretch softly across the wooden floors, falling in thin patches that warmed the space in muted gold. But as the day passed, that light faded quickly, leaving the room wrapped in the dim, quiet glow of lamps, lit early out of necessity. Even so, the families moved through these spaces with a calm acceptance, as if the limited light simply encouraged them to slow down, to breathe more softly, to settle more deeply into the steady rhythm of their lives. The ceilings of these tenements sometimes sagged from age. Plaster might crumble in small flakes, drifting to the floor like a delicate snowfall. But such details rarely startled the families who lived there. They learned to exist gently within these imperfect spaces, stepping around imperfections, adjusting their routines to the quirks of the building. The air, too, was not always fresh. Circulation was limited, the windows were often small, and the walls thick with years of repairs. A faint heaviness lingered in the rooms, a stillness that over time became part of the atmosphere they breathed each day. And then there was the scent of tobacco, soft at times, stronger at others, but always present. Because their work unfolded inside the home, the aroma of tobacco leaves drifted through every corner. It settled into the wooden boards, into fabrics, into the very air that cooled at night and warmed again in the morning. For some, this constant presence brought small strains to their health. A cough that lingered, a heaviness in the chest, or a slight weariness at the end of long days. Yet even these discomforts entered their lives without abruptness. They arrived like a slow-moving fog, something the families recognized gradually, in gentle shifts rather than sudden turns. Still, the Bohemians continued their work with the same steadiness as always. Their habits, formed through years of repetition, guided them through the day with soft precision. They rolled cigars slowly, shaped leaves carefully, and sorted bundles with quiet attention. In these rooms, work was not something separate from life. It was woven into the very fabric of their existence. The table where meals were shared was the same table where cigars were made. The room where children played was the room where adults labored. Nothing was divided. Everything flowed into everything else. This blending of living and working created a sense of continuity that shaped their days with gentle firmness. The families rarely questioned it. They accepted this merging of spaces as if it were a natural part of life. The home was their workplace, the workplace was their home. In the soft hours of evening, when the lamp's glow shimmered lightly against the walls, the very air seemed to hum with the memories of the day. The rustle of tobacco leaves, the quiet conversations exchanged between family members, the simple closeness of being together. Though the living conditions were modest and the air sometimes heavy, the families moved with a softness that made the spaces feel warmer than they were. Their presence brought life to the rooms, the whisper of footsteps, the gentle laughter of children, the murmured words spoken in their native tongue. Even in the most cramped corners of the tenement, there was a sense of calm born from familiarity. The walls, though old, felt protective. The narrow windows, though small, framed the sky in a way that made the outside world seem peaceful and far away. When health concerns surfaced, they did so quietly. A worker might cough more frequently, especially late at night when the air felt still. Another might feel their breath shorten after long hours leaning over the work table. Yet these moments did not break the flow of their days. The families adapted with gentle adjustments, resting a little longer before beginning work, letting the window stay open a bit wider during the warmer months, or sharing warm drinks that soothed the throat. Their resilience was soft, not forceful. They did not push against their conditions, they flowed around them, finding steady paths through each small challenge. Nighttime in the tenements carried its own quiet charm. When the lamps were extinguished, the rooms fell into near darkness, illuminated only by slivers of moonlight that touched the floor in pale silver shapes. The tobacco scent faded slightly in the cool night air, making space for deeper breaths. Families lay close, wrapped in blankets thin but familiar. In these moments, the concerns of the day softened. The imperfect ceiling, the limited light, the heavy air, all of it seemed distant, as if carried away by the quiet of the night. The families rested deeply, knowing that morning would come with the same gentle routines. They would rise slowly, begin their work again, and move through the day in calm continuity. And though their living conditions shaped their health in subtle ways, they did not dwell on discomfort. Instead, they embraced the unbroken rhythm of their lives, finding comfort in the familiar, in the presence of loved ones, and in the soft, steady flow of each passing day. Thus, within these small tenement rooms, simplicity became a form of quiet resilience. The Bohemian families shaped their lives gently, moving through each day with patience, warmth, and the soft acceptance of a world that, though imperfect, held them close with steady hands. Chapter 9. Misunderstandings and Outside Perceptions. In the soft folds of the Lower East Side, where life drifted quietly and each day blended into the next with the gentlest of transitions, the Bohemian community lived in a world shaped mostly by the warmth of their routines and the closeness of their families. Within their tenement walls, everything felt familiar, steady, and grounded in patterns they had carried across the ocean. But beyond those walls, the city formed its own opinions, sometimes sharp, sometimes unkind, and often born from misunderstanding. These outside perceptions floated around them like distant clouds, casting soft shadows that didn't always reflect the true nature of their quiet lives. In the larger immigrant landscape of New York, the Bohemians were sometimes viewed as a troubling group, a community labeled unfairly as difficult or disruptive. Yet the reality was far gentler. Their lives were not filled with chaos or unrest. Rather, they were built on careful persistence, soft-spoken dedication, and the simple desire to make ends meet in a new and unfamiliar land. The judgments others made did not come from knowing them closely, but from glancing from afar, seeing only the outlines of their struggles without understanding the tenderness behind their routines. Much of the misunderstanding came from the poverty that touched nearly every household in the Bohemian community. To those outside, poverty was often misread as refusal to improve, or as stubbornness, or even as risk. But inside the small rooms where families worked and lived, poverty was simply a condition of their circumstances, a quiet weight that rested gently but constantly on their shoulders. They did not wallow in it. They did not allow it to define them. They simply lived alongside it, moving through their days with patient acceptance and the soft determination to keep going. Their work, performed in the dim glow of lamps and the muted light from narrow windows, was often misunderstood too. Outsiders saw cramped rooms filled with tobacco leaves and long hours of labor, and assumed this environment led to unrest or dissatisfaction. But to the families inside, this work was the thread that stitched their lives together. It was steady, familiar, and shared among those they loved most. Though the hours were long and the spaces small, they found comfort in the closeness, in the quiet cooperation that flowed between parents, children, and neighbors. Language, too, played its part in shaping how others saw them. Because many Bohemians spoke only their native tongue, they remained at a distance from the broader community. Their conversations, their songs, their everyday speech all carried the soft, rolling sounds of their homeland. But to those who did not understand the words, this difference became a barrier. Some saw it as unwillingness to adapt, though in truth, the Bohemians simply lived within the gentle cocoon of their routines. Their days were filled with work done at home, shared with people who spoke the same language, leaving little time or need to step beyond the boundaries of their familiar world. As a result, their quiet nature, their inward focus, and their steady rhythms were sometimes interpreted as secrecy or reluctance to integrate. But if one stepped closer, if one sat at one of their work tables, or shared a warm meal at the end of a long day, the softness of their existence would be unmistakable. They were not distant, they were simply absorbed in the delicate balance of maintaining their lives. Despite the outside misunderstandings, the Bohemian community never allowed such impressions to trouble the inner calm they cultivated. They continued living in the way that felt true to them, simple, steady, and rooted in the bonds of work and family. Their tenements became safe harbors from the noise of the city's assumptions. Inside, their values were clear. Care for one another, share the load, keep the home warm, and maintain the gentle rhythm that carried them from dawn to dusk. The children grew up in this world of softness and routine. They heard whispers from beyond their windows, perhaps of how their community was perceived, but those whispers never entered the heart of their homes. Instead, their world was shaped by the warm tone of their parents' voices, the steady sound of leaves rustling under careful hands, and the soft glow of evenings spent in quiet conversation. In such a setting, the outside misunderstandings lost their power. They became distant noises, barely brushing the edges of daily life. To the Bohemians, community meant togetherness, not loud gatherings or grand events, but the gentle presence of neighbors who understood their lives intimately. They shared not only walls but work, stories, and the tender comforts of familiarity. When one family struggled, others stepped in quietly. When illness touched a household, meals appeared at their door without ceremony. Their generosity was not loud or showy. It flowed naturally like water, moving softly through a narrow channel. This inner strength, born from unity and quiet endurance, formed a buffer against the judgments of the outside world. They did not need to correct misunderstandings or argue their worth. They simply continued living with the gentle resilience that had carried them across the ocean and into this new life. In truth, their simplicity was their anchor. The Bohemians did not chase the bustling energy of the city or seek recognition from those who did not know them. They found comfort in small routines, in shared meals, in the soft repetition of their craft. While others moved quickly, they moved gently. While others sought attention, they sought calm. And in this calm, they found a kind of quiet dignity, a dignity that remained untouched by the misjudgments outside their doors. As years passed, those misunderstandings faded like distant echoes. What remained was the steady pulse of the community, the soft music of daily tasks, and the warmth of families who carried their traditions forward with grace. Their lives may have been simple, their spaces small, and their challenges many, but they walked through each day with unwavering gentleness. And in that gentleness, they created a world that, though misunderstood from afar, shone with a quiet, enduring light, soft as a whispered lullaby, steady as a heartbeat, and delicate as a breath drifting through a still night. Chapter 10: Education and the Gentle Path Toward a Better Life. In the quiet heart of the Bohemian community, tucked within the narrow buildings and softly lit rooms of the Lower East Side, an unspoken hope lingered like a gentle warmth. It was not loud or urgent, it did not push or demand. Instead, it floated softly through the air, passing from one family to another in whispers and tender glances. This hope was tied to something delicate, something distant, yet something that shimmered with possibility, the dream of education and the slow, patient path it might create toward a life less burdened by hardship. For many Bohemian families, the idea of rising out of poverty felt like a faraway star, visible but out of reach. Their days were filled with long hours of work, their nights often claimed by exhaustion. Their rooms, small and dimly lit, held little space for new beginnings or sudden changes. The weight of their routine pressed gently but firmly on their shoulders. They lived honestly, worked steadily, and survived with quiet resilience. Yet somewhere within that stillness, a soft desire stirred, a desire for something more for themselves, and especially for their children. Education was not something the families had easy access to. Many adults had grown up without formal learning, relying instead on trades passed down through generations. Their hands knew work intimately, shaping tobacco leaves with steady rhythms, repairing simple tools, or cooking warm meals. But letters, numbers, and books remained distant companions, not often welcomed into the tight boundaries of their daily lives. Still, the Bohemians understood in a gentle and instinctive way that knowledge carried a different kind of strength, one that could lift someone from the narrow rooms of the tenements and into a broader, brighter world. For the children, opportunities flickered softly like candles in the night. Some attended school when they could, stepping from the dim tenement stairways into classrooms where the sunlight filtered through wide windows. They sat at wooden desks listening to lessons in a language that still felt strange on their tongues. The teachers spoke slowly, and the children listened carefully, gathering new words like small treasures. Each new phrase, each sentence understood, widened the horizon just a little, allowing them to glimpse worlds beyond the familiar corners of their neighborhood. When these children returned home, their voices carried the gentle excitement of learning. They repeated the new words they had discovered, sometimes haltingly, sometimes with growing confidence. Their parents listened quietly, their eyes soft with a mixture of pride and longing. They knew they could not follow the children into these new worlds, but they could encourage them. They could create a space, however small, where learning felt welcomed, where curiosity was met with warmth rather than worry. In this way, education became a bridge, fragile at first, but gradually strengthening with each passing year. The families saw it as a path not just away from poverty, but toward self-reliance, toward new skills, and toward choices they themselves had never been able to make. For many adults, the dream was not for themselves, but for the next generation. They imagined their children growing into young adults who could speak English with ease, who could navigate the city with confidence, who could find work beyond the confines of their tenement rooms. Yet, even for adults, the idea of learning held its own quiet appeal. Some practiced new words in the evenings, repeating them softly while they worked. Others asked their children to teach them what they had learned. These moments were tender, filled with a shared courage that felt almost like a small light glowing in the dimness of the room. It was not easy for them. Learning after long days of labor required patience and strength, but the effort itself added warmth to their routines, a sense of movement toward something hopeful. The community, though humble in means, carried the dream with surprising strength. They spoke about opportunities not with urgency, but with soft determination. They believed that skill, whether learned through books, schooling, or new experiences, could one day help their families step into a life where choices were wider and burdens lighter. Even if they themselves never reached that place, they found comfort in imagining their children there. And so year after year, the dream of education remained a steady undercurrent beneath their daily lives. It moved like a quiet stream, shaping thoughts, guiding small decisions, encouraging them to lift their eyes beyond the immediate confines of their rooms. It helped them imagine possibilities beyond cigar-making and low wages. It allowed them to see their children not only as helpers in the present, but as bearers of a future filled with gentler paths. This hope also shaped their long-term endurance. When work felt heavy, when the long hours pressed down, when illness visited the home, the dream of a brighter future offered a soft counterbalance. It reminded them that the present moment, with all its challenges, could be part of a longer journey. A journey that might carry their families toward more open skies. They cherished this vision, not loudly, but with a steady and unwavering devotion. As the years passed, small changes began to appear. Some children learned to read fluently. Some young adults found work outside the tenements, using skills learned in school. These steps were modest, but to the families they felt significant, like the first gentle notes of a song slowly beginning to rise. Each accomplishment echoed softly through the community, bringing encouragement to others. In these tender advancements, the Bohemians found reassurance that their quiet hope had meaning. Education, though difficult to access, though slow to unfold, offered a subtle guiding light, a light that helped them see beyond poverty, beyond routine, beyond limitation. And through this light, the community held on to something deeper than survival. They held on to the belief that life could expand, open, and stretch towards something more peaceful. In this way, the Bohemians continued forward, guided by a vision that glowed softly within their hearts. They worked with patient hands, cared for their families with warmth, and nurtured their dreams without noise. And through their gentle persistence, they shaped a path, long, slow, and steady, toward a future that held the promise of something brighter. Closing the door to yesterday, drifting into peace. As this gentle journey through the past draws to a close, let the story settle softly around you like a warm blanket unfolding across the quiet room. The history we've wandered through, the narrow tenements, the long hours of work, the whispered hopes of the Bohemian community, belongs to another time, yet its echoes drift gently into our present. In those small, dimly lit rooms, generations found ways to endure, to adapt, and to hold on to one another with steady hands. Their world was shaped by routine and hardship, yet also by quiet resilience, by the simple strength of families working together in the soft glow of evening lamps. History often remembers grand events and loud voices, but the story you've heard is made of quieter things: slow footsteps on wooden floors, the rustle of tobacco leaves, the hum of conversations spoken in familiar tones. It is a history of people who survived not by noise but by gentleness, people who carried their dreams forward not with urgency but with patience. And though time has moved on, leaving those tenement halls behind, their memories linger like faint melodies drifting across the years, reminding us of the countless tender moments that shape human life. Now, as you rest, let those memories fade into a soft blur. Let the story become a gentle whisper, drifting farther from your thoughts with each slow breath. The struggles of the past are no longer yours to hold. Allow them to dissolve like mist, leaving only the calm, comforting sense of having walked through another world, one that has now settled peacefully behind you. Feel your body loosen, your breath deepen, your mind grow quiet. You have listened, you have traveled, and now it is time to drift into your own stillness. Let the weight of the day slip away, leaving you grounded, warm, and safe. Like the families who once rested in those small rooms after long days of work, you too may release all tension and surrender to the gentle pull of sleep. May your dreams be soft. May your night be deep and peaceful. May the calm of these stories follow you into the quiet places of your rest. Sleep well, dear listener. Sleep softly, sleep beautifully, and good night.